One June morning with soft pink sunlight spilling across her porch, old Mrs. Hilda, now don't picture a fairy tale grandma, mind you, just a 72-year-old woman who still wore crisply ironed blouses and lace-trimmed hats every morning, was sitting down to her usual breakfast, toast with raspberry jam. That's when she noticed a small blue box sitting on her doorstep. No return address. Just a handwritten note. Please plug it in. Now, Hilda wasn't the curious type, but there was something odd about the box. And to be fair, her internet had been acting up all morning. She couldn't even video call her three-corner tea time gang, a group of old friends who gossiped on Zoom every Friday. She was quietly fuming. So she did something she never thought she'd do at 72. She plugged the box into the wall. A green light blinked on instantly, and just like that, her Wi-Fi snapped back. Crystal clear video. High-def clarity. Her friends even teased her. Whoa, Hilda, did you upgrade your internet? You're glowing like you hit the lottery. But that wasn't the end of it. That night, she asked around the neighborhood to see if anyone had dropped off the strange blue box. No one had. The next day, she unplugged it just to test it, and boom, the internet was gone again. Plugged it back in, Wi-Fi returned. It was like the little box could control the signal at will. Hilda had lived alone ever since her husband Frank passed away 6 years ago. The house had grown used to its quiet, just the hum of the radio and the soft gurgle of boiling tea. But now, this little blinking green box felt like a tiny creature whispering in the night, "You're not alone." And for someone elderly and living alone, being connected, not just to Wi-Fi, but to the world, that little box felt almost like a miracle. Hilda didn't say it out loud, but yes, she was a little scared. And yes, she was a little glad too, because no one knew where the box came from, but somehow it showed up at just the right time. The first week with the blue box, Mrs. Hilda seemed lighter somehow. Every morning, she video called her old teacher friends from back in the day. In the evenings, she watched YouTube tutorials on how to make authentic French croissants without a fancy oven. She even secretly downloaded Tinder, just to see, as she told herself, what the young fellas are saying these days. The internet ran like a smooth waltz. No glitches, no lag. The box blinked its little green light each time she powered up her computer. It didn't buzz, didn't hum, didn't make a peep. Just sat there, like an old friend who knew when to stay quiet. Until one Wednesday afternoon. Hilda was sweeping the porch when she noticed the neighbor boy, Rory, 13, green hair, pierced ear, leaning over her fence, fiddling with his phone. His eyes lit up like he just hit the jackpot. "What are you doing, young man?" she asked, still holding the broom. Rory jumped, blushing. Just downloading a game. But the Wi-Fi here is crazy fast. I just leveled up to 50. Hilda blinked. "Wait, what? You're getting Wi-Fi out here? In the yard?" "Yeah, did you upgrade or something? Our Wi-Fi barely reaches the kitchen, but today I stepped by your fence and bam, download's flying." Hilda smiled and nodded, but something in her stomach dropped, like a pebble falling into her teacup. That evening, for the first time in years, she opened her computer settings and poked around until she found the Wi-Fi info. Network name, OmniNode 40's security, none. Connected devices, a mix of iPhones, Androids, tablets, even a smart fridge. She sat still for a long while. This wasn't her internet. No one on her street had set this up for her. That little box wasn't just giving her Wi-Fi, it was giving it to the entire neighborhood. No password, no limit. And apparently, it didn't belong to any of them. She glanced over at the small blinking box in the corner of the room. Still tiny, still quiet, still harmless. But in that quiet house where the loudest sounds were usually a whistling kettle or a ticking clock, Hilda began to feel something was off. A box that gives too much. Sometimes that's exactly when you should start asking questions. After that discovery the night before, Mrs. Hilda tossed and turned in bed. The little green blinking box sat quietly on the corner of the table, as if it couldn't care less that she'd just uncovered a pretty significant truth. 17 devices connected to my Wi-Fi, she whispered to her cat, Pickles. And I only have one laptop. Isn't that strange? Pickles didn't respond, just nudged her hand with his head, eyes half closed like, Wi-Fi, Schweify, what's for dinner? The next morning, she decided to bring it up with Mr. Floyd, the neighbor next door who trimmed bonsai trees and firmly believed 5G was a government conspiracy. "You got one of them Wi-Fi boxes, huh?" Mr. Floyd squinted over the fence. I've seen some weird cars parked in front of your house lately. Real weird. People in black clothes, sunglasses. Hilda raised an eyebrow. When was this? Last Thursday afternoon. I was watering my orchids. I saw it plain as day. A guy stood at your door for a long time, just watching. Then he left. She paused. Last Thursday afternoon, that was probably when the delivery girl dropped off the box. She had been wearing a black jacket, but sunglasses? That part was probably just Floyd's imagination. You should be careful. Floyd lowered his voice like he was sharing state secrets. I've heard they put trackers in those things. Mind control devices. Hilda burst out laughing, nearly spilling her tea. Floyd, the only thing in my mind worth controlling is my nap schedule and my collection of black and white movies from the 60s. But that afternoon, things truly went sideways. Another neighbor, Natalie, who often did yoga on her front lawn, came knocking with the face of someone who'd lost her will to live, not just her Wi-Fi. Miss Hilda, I've been without internet all day. A few days ago I was getting super strong signal. Now it's completely gone. Did you change the password? I wouldn't even know how to do that. Then whose box is that? It's messing with everyone's connection. The tech guy said there's a strange signal source disrupting the whole area. Hilda's heart sank. So what she thought was a technological blessing was actually turning the neighborhood upside down. Half the neighbors thought she was a hacker grandma, and the other half were convinced they were being tracked by a magical broadcast box. Pickles looked at her, raising one eyebrow like, "Told you so." And Hilda could only sigh. "Hilda," she muttered to herself, "did you just become the main character in some kind of neighborhood investigation?" That morning started like any other. Clear skies, soft sunlight, and Pickles perched squarely in Mrs. Hilda's lap, yawning as if the only thing worth caring about in the world was lunch. Then came the doorbell. Not the usual cheerful chime, but a series of urgent presses, the kind that said, "This is not a social visit." Mrs. Hilda straightened her cardigan, slipped on her slippers, and opened the door. Standing there were two uniformed police officers. One was young, face tight like a stretched rubber band. The other, older, calm but with eyes sharp enough to peel an apple. "Good morning, ma'am. We're with the local police. We need a moment of your time." Mrs. Hilda blinked. Pickles patted over, looked up at the officers, and let out a long, disinterested yawn, clearly unimpressed by badge-wielding justice. "What's this about, gentlemen?" she asked, her voice as gentle as morning tea. "We've had reports of signal interference in the area," the older officer said. "The source appears to be coming from your home." "Oh, you mean that little box?" she said, pointing inside, where the router still blinked its soft green light like forgotten Christmas lights. They stepped in, bringing with them the scent of rubber soles, cold coffee, and a sense that this might be more serious than she'd thought. "There's no official branding on this device," the younger officer noted, inspecting it. "Who gave it to you?" "A delivery girl. Black jacket. Very polite. Wished me happy browsing." The older officer frowned slightly. "Did you check what was in the box?" "Just the router and a sheet of instructions, all technical jargon. I mostly just pressed buttons and hoped for the best." They plugged some sort of diagnostic device into the router. It beeped a few times. Then they looked at each other, silently exchanging that, "Yep, this is the one" kind of look. "Ma'am," they said after a moment, "this device is emitting signals outside the normal civilian range. It could be tied to unauthorized surveillance or interference with defense communications." Mrs. Hilda nearly dropped her coffee. "Excuse me, I just wanted to video call my grandkids in Australia." "We're going to need to take the device in for further inspection. In the meantime, please don't connect any additional devices." She nodded, her mind tangled like the old ball of yarn in the back of her closet. As they left, Pickles jumped onto the table, watching them like they were stealing his favorite toy. Mrs. Hilda sat down slowly, still holding her now cold coffee. "Technology," she muttered. "Just like men, shows up all shiny and exciting, then suddenly gets you a visit from the police." Once the two officers had gone, taking the magic box sealed in that odd insulated bag, Mrs. Hilda noticed an unusual stillness in the house. The little green light had stopped blinking. The cheerful ding from her phone's virtual doorbell was gone too. All that remained was the steady tick of the old wall clock, and the soft, rhythmic sound of Pickles licking his paw, utterly unbothered. But something inside her wouldn't settle. That night, sleep eluded her. It wasn't her back or her knees keeping her up. No, it was the kind of restless wondering that only visits when everything else is quiet. She lay there staring at the ceiling, thoughts spiraling, until a memory nudged her. The instruction sheet. It was still in the kitchen drawer. She patted down the hall, opened the drawer, and pulled out the paper, folded into quarters, the ink already starting to fade. Most of it was the kind of tech speak she'd long learned to ignore. But then, down at the bottom, in small italic letters that looked like they weren't meant to be seen, if you find this line, you should not connect the device. It does more than transmit. She sat up straighter, clutching the paper. Her heart thudded, not from age, but from a feeling she couldn't name. More than transmit? What else had it been doing? By morning, her curiosity had turned into quiet determination. She put on her sweater, grabbed her tote, and made her way to the town library, a place she usually visited for cozy mysteries and baking books. But today, she walked straight up to the desk and asked, in a voice that surprised even herself, about satellite signals. The young librarian blinked. Satellite signals? Mrs. Hilda nodded. The librarian adjusted her glasses, clearly intrigued. Mrs. Hilda never asked about things like that, but today, something was different. Well, ma'am, if it's operating outside the standard civilian spectrum, that edges into military-grade territory. It could be logging data or even linking to an unidentified satellite. So, is it possible it was tracking? She asked. The librarian nodded, visibly intrigued. Absolutely possible. There's been talk about free router giveaways that are really just data collection schemes in disguise. By the time Mrs. Hilda returned home, her thoughts were racing. She walked past her desk, meaning to put the kettle on when she froze. Her laptop, still open, was bathed in a soft blue glow. But it wasn't the light that made her stop cold. It was the words on the screen, "Upload complete. Thank you for your cooperation." She hadn't sent a thing, hadn't typed a single letter. Thank you? For what? She glanced around her familiar little kitchen, which now felt oddly foreign, like someone else had been living there, unnoticed, right alongside her. Pickles looked up, gave a short, dismissive snort. "If only you could talk, Pickles," she murmured. "I have a feeling you'd already know how this all ends." The police returned on a Thursday morning, the sky as gray as the wool coat Mrs. Hilda always kept hanging by the door. They knocked, not urgently, but firmly enough for her to set her teaspoon down mid-stir. "Mrs. Hilda, we need to follow up on a few things," said the younger officer, Nolan, his voice more serious this time. They stepped inside, removing their hats and wiping their shoes on the rug, even though it hadn't rained a drop. The way they glanced around reminded Du and Mrs.'s. Hilda of visiting an old friend who had just passed, respectful but cautious. "We've analyzed the device you turned in," said the older officer. "There's evidence suggesting it wasn't just an ordinary router, you know, the kind used to broadcast Wi-Fi." "Oh, I figured as much," she nodded, gently placing a teacup in front of them. It buzzed at night and sometimes made Pickles bark at the wall. Nolan gave a slight smile, but the older officer didn't. "Mrs. Hilda, it appears the device was collecting data from nearby electronics, phones, laptops, even e-readers. But more concerning is that it was transmitting that data to an unidentified server overseas." Mrs. Hilda furrowed her brow slowly. "So someone, somewhere, could be reading the pages of my unfinished novel manuscript?" "Very likely," Nolan said, "or looking at your family photos if they're stored on your devices." Pickles let out a low growl from beneath her feet, as if he understood. "And do you remember the delivery girl? The one who installed the device?" the older officer asked. "We haven't found any real record of her in the system. Her name, Lila, right? Doesn't match any employee of the local telecom company." The room fell still. Mrs. Hilda tightened her grip on the teacup handle and glanced out the window, where the lavender bushes were just beginning to bloom a soft purple. She felt like she'd stepped into a modern mystery, where the secrets weren't hidden in closets, but in invisible signals floating all around us. "These days," she said quietly, "thieves don't need to climb through windows. All they need is a password and a little trust." "We suspect there's an organization behind this," Nolan added, "operating like a cybercrime ring, and they may be targeting older individuals, those who are more trusting and less guarded. Mrs. Hilda gave a faint chuckle. Maybe it's time I learn about firewalls instead of garlic bread recipes. For the first time, the older officer cracked a smile. We'll continue the investigation. Don't worry, but if you remember anything, no matter how small, give us a call. When they left, Mrs. Hilda gently closed the door. Then she stood there for a moment, her hand stroking Pickles' head. "Their network's clever, Pickles," she whispered. "But we're not exactly easy to fool, are we?" Pickles wagged his tail, and Mrs. Hilda turned back toward the kitchen, opening her notebook, not to jot down a recipe this time, but to start recording the details no one had asked about yet. Some truths don't strike like lightning, but settle quietly like a drizzle, leaving the heart damp and never quite dry. That morning, Mrs. Hilda opened the old tin box where she kept things to deal with later. It was a habit she had learned from her husband George, who always believed that everything had its time. She dug out the small piece of paper the girl named Lila had left when she installed the Wi-Fi, a tiny QR code with a note that read, "For assistance." Out of curiosity, or perhaps a sense of intuition, Mrs. Hilda used her old tablet to scan it. In an instant, the screen flashed to a strange website filled with lines of code and charts she couldn't begin to understand. But amidst the chaos, one line of text made her freeze. Project Athena, test area, Windmere. Windmere, where she lived, the place where people still sent handwritten postcards instead of emails, where apple pie still reigned supreme over every trendy food movement. Her heart tightened. She traced the IP address revealed by the website. Even though she didn't fully understand what it was, she snapped a photo and sent it to Nolan. A few hours later, he called back with an entirely different tone. "Mrs. Hilda, we think we found the key. Project Athena isn't just personal espionage. It's an AI testing system, disguised as a civilian device. The people of Windmere are unknowingly becoming guinea pigs in a behavior tracking experiment." Mrs. Hilda sat still in her armchair, gripping an old photo of George, as if he were still sitting there, nodding along as she told him the story. "AI experiment," she repeated slowly. "So they even know I sneak cookies after 8 p.m.? They even know you make video calls to your grandchild every Tuesday morning," Nolan replied, no longer trying to sound lighthearted. Silence hung in the air for a moment. Mrs. Hilda gazed out the window, where her small garden still bloomed brightly in the spring sunlight. This town had been peaceful for so long, people had forgotten that peace doesn't always mean safety. "So we're not just losing privacy," she said, her voice growing more somber. "We're losing the trust that our home is the one place we can truly be ourselves." Nolan quietly responded, "We'll do everything we can to stop it. But you understand, the truth this time isn't locked away in a basement, it's in every stream of signal." Mrs. Hilda smiled softly, as though she had seen an entire life unfold in the palm of her hand. "All right," she said. "If they want to play with trust, we'll show them that the old folks in Windmere aren't so easy to program." Pickles barked once, as if in agreement. Some people reach their twilight years hoping for peace. Then there are those like Mrs. Hilda who begin to open the Pandora's box of their lives. After the conversation with Nolan, she couldn't sleep. She sat in the living room, the pendulum clock gently swinging through the night, and Pickles curled up by her feet like a breathing stuffed pillow. Her face was turned toward the dark space between two bookshelves, where the light didn't reach, just like the memories she had tucked away so long ago. She stood up, gently pulled open the old wooden cupboard door, and took out a faded tin box. Not the cookie tin from before, but the one labeled "Old Work, Do Not Touch." Only she knew what was inside. Inside were faded documents, an ID card with the words Hilda Brunner, Strategic Data Analyst, Department of Defense, and a few black and white photos taken with colleagues, some smiling, some with hands covering their faces. Back then, she worked in a special task force dedicated to detecting data manipulation in civilian systems. When she retired, they offered her a generous salary to stay on, but she turned it down. She knew if she kept going, there would come a time when she wouldn't be able to tell the difference between surveillance for safety and tracking for control. And now, everything she had once feared was happening right in her own home. Not in the Capitol, not in a secret meeting room, but in the free Wi-Fi modems provided for lonely elderly people. Maybe I'm not just a curious old lady like everyone thinks, she chuckled softly. Maybe this 70th year is just the beginning of a new start. The reason she installed Wi-Fi wasn't just to call her grandchild or watch baking videos. It was because 3 months ago, she came across a vague report about a social interaction enhancement program from a private tech company. The name Lila in the list of intern employees caught her eye. A name she had encountered years ago at a data industry seminar when Lila was just a first-year student. Since then, she had been suspicious, and instead of stepping back, she decided to play the role of a naive old lady to get to the bottom of it. Not out of curiosity, but because she had promised George, her late husband and partner in crime, that if the world ever needed her again, she wouldn't turn her back. And now, that moment had come. Pickles lifted his head to look at her as if sensing something was changing. She gently stroked his curly fur, then murmured, "I won't just expose them. I'll make sure they don't dare do this to anyone else again." Windmere was about to have a major game, and this time the elderly would be the ones making the rules. That morning, Mrs. Hilda was about to pour hot water into the teapot when the sound of police sirens filled the air. Not one, but 3. They stopped right in front of house number 11, Lila's house. Pickles barked once and ran to the window. Mrs. Hilda moved over and peered through the curtain. A group of plainclothes officers was talking to Lila, the curly-haired, skinny girl who always wore round glasses and carried a laptop covered in cat stickers. Her face showed clear signs of confusion. Then, like a slow-motion film, they handcuffed her in front of the neighbors, including Mr. Gerald, who was watering his plants, and Mrs. Myrtle, who was lounging in a chair as if she had just witnessed a crime of the century. "My goodness, just yesterday she helped me update my printer software," Mrs. Myrtle said, still clutching her chest. "The printer's awfully suspicious now," Mr. Gerald muttered. Mrs. Hilda said nothing. She simply poured the tea, placed the cup on the table, and then turned inside. In her heart, she knew very well Lila wasn't the mastermind. Lila had been here many times before, bringing sandwiches, updating software, fixing network cables, even adding a sunshade to Mrs. Hilda's computer. These things weren't in the contract. They were signs of someone with a heart, and Mrs. Hilda believed in small details like that. But the problem was, the people behind the free Wi-Fi scheme were very clever. When the project started to be exposed, who would be an easier scapegoat than a young technician, lacking power and connections? She reopened the old computer and connected to a private network she had quietly maintained alongside the Windmere free Wi-Fi. A few unusual data packets had been sent from her house during the night, not from Lila, but from an intermediary device she had once found in the fiber optic connection box. The girl may have unknowingly been turned into a data relay tool. Mrs. Hilda knew time was running out. Once Lila was jailed, the information would be twisted and her testimony could be guided. If she didn't act immediately, an innocent person would be sacrificed for the shadowy figures behind it all. Pickles lay quietly under the table, but its eyes were still fixed on her, as if it too understood something larger was coming. She typed a few commands into the computer. The interface displayed a network data model. Connecting wires, hidden devices, and an interactive map appeared before her eyes. "If you think catching a girl is enough to fool me," she muttered, "you're dead wrong." The game was still on, but this time, Mrs. Hilda wouldn't let them lead her by the nose again. That evening, Windmere was enveloped in the soft, golden glow of the setting sun. The houses remained as peaceful as ever, with only the distant hum of cars rolling down the tree-lined streets and the gentle sound of insects chirping in the garden. In her small office, Mrs. Hilda sat before the glowing screen, still cradling a warm cup of ginger tea. Pickles curled up contentedly in her lap, giving a low growl as if to remind her that it was time to rest. But Mrs. Hilda knew tonight had not yet reached its end. Her private network, a modest setup crafted from old devices and basic encryption, was running at full throttle. She had followed the data packets from the free Wi-Fi network that the entire neighborhood used without a second thought. Now it was as clear as day. A powerful tech company, one that no one would have ever suspected, was pulling the strings. Beneath the mask of community outreach, they were collecting data, analyzing behavior, and quietly taking control of the electronic devices in people's homes. A massive game where people were nothing more than tiny dots on the map. Mrs. Hilda had no plans to expose them in the media. Not yet, anyway. Instead, she did what only someone with enough age and experience would think of. She sent a packet of documents to a very specific address, an old friend who worked in digital privacy protection, a person who owed her an unspoken debt from the 1980s. The world hasn't changed all that much, she muttered. It just keeps reshaping itself, becoming more brazen. The next morning, the first piece of news on social media was that Lila had been released due to insufficient evidence. The photo of the young girl smiling next to her mother made Mrs. Hilda smile faintly in return. But she knew this small victory was merely the beginning. At that moment, the doorbell rang. She opened it to find a middle-aged man in a long coat, a face she recognized, but with an expression that held an understanding beyond words. "We've received your data," he said in a low voice, "and perhaps you should know, this is just the tip of the iceberg." Mrs. Hilda raised an eyebrow, then turned and walked inside, pouring 2 more cups of tea. "Then come in. But a word of warning. Pickles doesn't like liars." The man laughed softly as he stepped inside, and the night continued to blanket Windmere, a small town that seemed calm and serene. But now Mrs. Hilda knew better than anyone. True peace doesn't come from hiding, but from having the courage to confront the truth.
Dear friends, if you've listened this far, allow me to send you a big, warm hug through words to your heart. Thank you for taking the time, amidst the chaos of life, to sit and listen to me tell my stories. On those long nights, my voice echoing through tiny earphones or the speaker of your phone, I always hope that, even if just a little, it brings you some warmth, like the small light on Mrs. Hilda's porch in the foggy town. If you're curious about the untold parts, if you're still wondering what truly happened after the last Wi-Fi signal, then I invite you to stay. Because Mrs. Hilda's journey is not over yet. Not everyone has the patience to notice the strange things that start with the smallest details. But if you're the kind of person who enjoys following clues, little scraps of paper, those fleeting glances through the window, then I think you'll love what comes next. Hit the follow button so I know you're still out there, and that I should continue telling the story. After all, a story only truly lives when there are ears to listen. With much love, Miss Ellie.